People often talk about, I'm stuck in a cycle of anxiety, or I'm struggle with the anxiety loop. But what actually is the anxiety loop? And if you understand it, more importantly, how can you break it? Now, it's funny because many people who struggle with anxiety have tried those things like taking deep breaths, thinking positive, or just distracting yourself. And I have said repeatedly that I don't like those ideas. And understanding the anxiety loop that we're going to expose today, that is really going to help you consolidate exactly why that stuff doesn't work effectively and what to do instead. For those just tuning in, here's what this channel's all about. My name's Howard Cooper. I've been working therapeutically with people, helping them to become free from anxiety for 19 plus years. And this channel is all about sharing anxiety beating tips, psychological hacks to help you become free from anxiety. If that's the sort of stuff that appeals to you, then make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any of the new content that's coming out. One of the reasons I'm so passionate about sharing this stuff is because I am an ex-anxiety sufferer. When I was 15, 16, I was diagnosed as having a severe anxiety and panic disorder. That's long into my past. I've now spent 19 plus years helping people overcome these issues with stuff that I wish I'd have known. The anxiety loop is one of those things that for me is so crucial in getting in terms of becoming free from anxiety. By the way, if you want to find out more about my own mental health battles from years gone by, there is a YouTube video where I talk very openly about that. The link's there. So the first question that we really need to dive into is, what is the anxiety loop? And I think there's only one way to do this. We've got to go over to the whiteboard. Anxiety is your response to perceived threat in experience. The images in your mind and the words in your head. If you're doing what if thinking, what if this happens or what if that happens, and the images that you're making or the words that you're saying to them yourself, like what if this terrible outcome occurs, you treat it as real, then likely you're interpreting it as a threat, and you therefore get, there you go, sensations of anxiety. But then here's the interesting thing. Because you're now feeling anxious and you have sensations of anxiety, therefore, if they're feeling anxious, there must be a real threat in the images and in the words. So the feelings of anxiety then feed back round into more what if thinking, which then feeds back, if you treat it as real, into sensations of anxiety, and the whole loop goes round and round and round. And if you relate to that, then likely you're starting, let's use green for this, you're starting over here. And I would say, what are the images and words that you're creating, that you're doing, the thinking that you're falling for that's causing these sensations of anxiety? But some people don't resonate with that. What they do is, and I'll give you a good example, people with health anxiety. And by the way, when I talk about health anxiety, I'm talking about people who get a headache and they're convinced it's a tumour, and they get very anxious about that. Or they have a spicy meal and they have some indigestion, but to them it's esophageal cancer. That's what they become concerned about. But often what happens is they start with not a sensation of anxiety, but they start with a real sensation, i.e. they really do have a headache. Then they create some images at that point of, what if it's a tumour? And then they get absorbed into those thoughts. They'll then have a sensation of anxiety, and then they'll feed it back round into, well, if I really am feeling anxious, it must mean that there really is a threat. It must mean that there really is a brain tumour. And then they go back and the whole loop continues. But they're using a real physical sensation as the starter to kick the whole cycle off. It doesn't really matter which way you start on this journey, whether it's with images or words or whether it's a sensation. The reality of it is that breaking that pattern, breaking the anxiety loop, is one of the keys to becoming free from anxiety. And I've spoken about this many times on my YouTube channel, that one of the three big mistakes that people make with dealing with anxiety is they go, I mustn't think about it, or take deep breaths, or try and think positive. But none of those things inherently do anything to break the cycle of anxiety, and in many ways they actually perpetuate it. And the age-old analogy I use repeatedly is that idea of my son coming into my bedroom and saying,
"There's a monster under my bed!"
How effective would it be if I said to him, George, there's no monster, but whatever you do, don't look it in the eye? If I tell him he mustn't look it in the eye, it implies it really is a threat. So if someone's saying to themselves, I mustn't have these images and I mustn't have these words, they're actually implying deep down that, well, why not? Because if there really isn't a threat in those images or words or just those thoughts, why would you have to get rid of them? But if you're treating them as a threat, which likely treat them as real, you'd have to get rid of them if it really was a threat. And therefore you get anxiety and it goes back round. So that's not what we want to do. What we really want to do I need a red pen. I need a red pen. Hold on, I'll get the red pen. I'm back. What we really need to do is to think about how do we break the link at this point, and how do we break the link at this point? Can we disconnect the images and words from the sensations? And on the other side of it, can we stop attaching images and words to these sensations? And if we can, this is the route to becoming free from anxiety. Focusing your efforts not on trying to get rid of these, but simply breaking the links between here and here on both sides is the way to go. So let me hop over to the studio and share with you some strategies for breaking the links between those two things. And by the way, there was a YouTube video I did a little while ago called 8 Strategies for Beating Anxiety. And if you go through that, get curious about which points am I breaking? And most of them fall into the category of being either one or the other. So it's time to share what are some strategies you can implement in order to sever the link between images in your mind, words that you're saying to yourself, and then a resulting feeling. Well, one of the easiest ways to do this is to simply remember that they're just thoughts, to not treat them as though that they have some predictive nature, that your thoughts, just thinking it, doesn't make it true. Here's a quick fun experiment to do. Close your eyes and imagine really vividly that you've just won the lottery. You see those images, hear yourself saying, we've won, this is incredible, this is amazing. Begin to get excited about what am I going to do with all the money? It's just amazing. How are you? Okay, great. When you've done that and you've really gone through that vividly in your mind, open your eyes back up and now let me ask you a question. Are you now more likely to win the lottery?
Our survey said...
You're really not. Statistically, whether you win the lottery or not hasn't changed just because you thought about it. You made all those images in your mind, those words in your head, but what difference did it make to actual reality? Nothing. Because imagining stuff and saying stuff to yourself doesn't make it happen. Think about it this way. The people that I work with over like a fear of flying, they often say to me, I say to myself, what if we crashed? And I imagine the plane crashing and, okay. But whether the plane crashes or not has nothing to do with whether you thought that. I guarantee no one gets to 35,000 feet. They're cruising and the pilot comes on and says,
"Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. Unfortunately, we were going to be flying fine, everything's looking good, but
Ethel on the back row imagined us crashing, so we have no choice but to go down." It's ridiculous. Just because we think it doesn't make it true. The only question is that can we connect with that? So one thing that really helps is just to verbally, if you're saying internal dialogue to yourself, add in the phrase, I'm experiencing the thought. What if something bad happens? Going back to the fear of flying analogy, if you have the thought, what if we crash? Notice how that feels versus saying to yourself, I'm experiencing the thought. What if we crash? It helps you to step back and realize it's just thought. It's just words in your mind. And that really helps break the connection between having the thought and having the feeling. We don't treat it as real. Remembering it's just a picture or just a thought really helps. The other thing you can do with images is just imagine stepping out of them and see the thought as though it's on a TV screen in your mind, and stepping out and seeing it just as a picture rather than being something that's you're in and caught up in really helps to remind you it's just a picture. Now, I remember going to an art exhibition and I was walking along and I could see these two rather what I would call hoity-toity art critics extolling the virtues of this wonderful picture. But the picture itself was just around the corner. I couldn't see it, but I could hear them talking about it. And as I got closer and closer, I became more and more curious. What was this picture they were looking at? Because they were exclaiming, "Oh, it's beautiful. Oh, it's exquisite. Oh, it fills me with such a warm, fuzzy feeling. The brushstrokes, the light, the capturing of the moment, it's effervescent," and so on and so forth. And I just got really curious. What is it that they were looking at? And as I go around the corner and I see it, I was mesmerised. It was a medieval painting depicting an execution. someone's head was being lopped off and you could see the blood spurting out, depicted. In many ways, you could argue pretty grotesque. But they were looking at this going, oh, it's beautiful. Because, of course, it's just a picture. Could you look at a picture like that and do you have to feel bad? Some people think that, like, if they have a negative thought, they have to feel bad. No, it's just a picture. And remembering that you don't have to. There's no mandatory response that you have to feel a certain way when you see in inverted commas, negative image is really useful to keep in mind. So on the other side of the anxiety loop, how do you stop going from sensation to reinforcing the image as true? There's a few distinctions to make and a few dots to join up, as it were, that can really make a difference. Number one is realizing that the sensation doesn't tell you anything about your future, or the sensation itself doesn't tell you anything other than how absorbed were you getting in the images. In other words, if you stop making meaning out of it, in that because it's real anxiety doesn't mean there's a real threat. That's interesting to really pay attention to. It might feel like there's real anxiety, but that doesn't tell you whether there's a threat. The only thing it tells you is how absorbed were you in the images and words you were making. So that's the first link that's going to help break that. The other thing is to understand that sensations by themselves don't tell you a whole lot. And I'll give you a good example. If I feel my heart racing, what does that actually tell me? Now, I'll ask that to people in sessions, and sometimes they'll say, well, it tells you that you're anxious. And it doesn't. Think about it. If I feel my heart racing, what it actually tells me is my heart's racing. That's it. However, if I see a beautiful woman in the distance and feel heart racing, then seeing beautiful woman plus heart racing, now I create a story, a narrative made up between the sensation and the image. And I'm likely to interpret that as attraction or arousal or excitement. However, if I see a spider run out across the kitchen floor, I don't go and ask the spider out on a date. Instead, I likely link the image I'm seeing, that of spider, plus a feeling of beating heart. I now link it with, it must be fear or anxiety. If I go up one flight of stairs and feel my heart racing, I have a totally different story. I'm unfit, I must get fitter, or I must go to the gym. But the sensation by itself doesn't tell me that. So going back to the anxiety loop, one thing that you can do is get much better or increase your capacity to, can you scan your body, feel sensations without creating story or images or words around it? Could you just feel it as a sensation? Here's a good exercise to do, and I encourage you to try this. Place your hand on the table in front of you, or on a surface, a bed, or wherever you are. Close your eyes and just notice, what are you actually feeling? And many people will say, well, I'm feeling the table, or I'm feeling the bed, or I'm feeling the desk. But desk isn't a feeling. Table isn't a feeling. What I'm actually asking you to do is to pay attention to what sensations in and of themselves are you feeling. Hardness, coldness, some resistance, some pulsing, any tension. These are sensations. And what happens is, likely, if you put your hand on a table, there'll be some hardness, some smoothness, some coldness. And then what you do is you take these sensations, and in your mind you label these sensations as, table. But table isn't a feeling. No one ever woke up and said, I felt miserable, and then I felt happy, and then I felt table. It's not a feeling. Have you ever had this? You go on a roller coaster, and you get off the roller coaster with someone, and you both go, oh my word, did you feel my stomach dropped? That's a sensation. Yeah, and I felt my heart racing. That's a sensation. And I was shaking, and yeah, that's a sensation. And then one of you will go, and I'm never going to do that. It was terrifying. And the other one, who's had the same sensations, will go, it was the most wonderful, exciting experience. Let's go again. Same sensations, but totally different stories attached to it. The sensations themselves aren't the threat. The sensations are just sensations. They don't tell you anything. So go back to health anxiety, which is the example we used when we went over to the whiteboard. Someone has a headache. Could you just sit with the sensations, pay attention to the sensations, and just notice them by themselves without attaching the images or words of, and notice that even if the images, it's a tumour or picturing a brain tumour appeared, you could just know it's just a picture, it's just a thought. So that you keep stripping it away and going back into just the sensation by itself. That's a useful mechanism to go through. Another thought around this is that when people say, I have anxiety or I feel anxious, could you just get a bit more sensory specific about what actually are you feeling? When you say, I feel anxious, that's a bit like saying, I feel table. What are the sensations that you're actually having that people label as anxiety? So, for example, yes, I feel my heart racing. Perhaps I feel tightness in my chest or tension in my throat. Or I have a feeling of movement and clenching in my stomach. These are all sensations. And then you can just go through and can you feel those sensations in and of themselves without attaching a whole story to it? And this means that there's a threat. Practicing on both sides of this anxiety loop and having your attention to how do I break the link between images, words, and sensations, and the link between sensations going back to images and words, how do I break those? That's likely to be much more fruitful in your journey to help you become free from anxiety than simply trying to tell yourself, I mustn't feel it, I have to distract myself, I have to think positive, or just take some deep breaths. If you've got any other questions about this as you're applying this stuff, leave in the comments below and I will be sure to come back to you and add some content if necessary or answer the questions directly. As always, if you've enjoyed this, please like it, comment on it and share it, because that way YouTube knows this is content that's worth putting out there and we can help more people who are struggling on their journey becoming free from anxiety. I hope you've enjoyed and good luck implementing all this so you can break free of the anxiety loop.